Yo, what's up, man? The video just started recording when I was walking back. Welcome to the podcast with Soul. The podcast with Soul. Myself, Sean Gumby Publishing, and the Stigmatism in My Soul. We don't wish to slander, libel, or defame anybody as it relates to what we're going to talk about today, which is a court case involving Dion Lamont Gatlin, aka Cuffy. The Franks hearing dated October 19th, 2016. Excerpts A, B, and C of Volume 3 of Frank's hearing. Case number 4:14-CR-88 RWS, Eastern District of Missouri. So, Cuff texted me the other day, and I had already read this, what I'm finna talk to you about. In the Franks hearing, under direct examination of Keith Cromer by Attorney Welby in St. Louis, Keith Cromer testifies on the stand that in 2012, in the middle of an investigation, a DEA investigation, initiated in Atlanta DEA. Right in the middle of that investigation, the special agent in charge of the St. Louis office leaves St. Louis, comes to Atlanta, and becomes the special agent in charge of the Atlanta office. This is right in the middle of the investigation of Cuffy. Now, where this centers around in the Franks hearing is this questioning by Welby, and Welby is dope. Welby is money. He's sharp. They're talking about Welby. This gets fleshed out from Keith Cromer while he's being direct examined by Welby about meeting Tammy Cowens at the movies. Well, Keith Cromer saying he invited his brother to the movies and Tammy Cowens showed up because his brother told her. Meeting Tammy Cowens at dinner, that him and his brother was out at dinner. His brother calls Tammy Cowens and tells her, I'm out with my brother Keith. She shows up at the dinner. On the trips to Biloxi, Mississippi, between when Keith Cromer goes on these trips with his college roommate, and Tammy Cowens is on these trips as well. And another trip to, one was the Biloxi, Mississippi, and I think another one was up in Tennessee. And she's on this trip. So while Welby is direct examining Keith Cromer under this umbrella of questioning regarding his relationship with Tammy Cowens, the special agent in charge of the St. Louis office becomes the special agent in charge of the Atlanta office and effectively takes the investigation from Atlanta and shifts it to St. Louis. Now, during this same time, this is also around the time, the questioning from Welby, is when the August of 2012 is the date that is being focused heavily on by Welby, because this is the date of the St. Louis Title III wiretaps affidavit, which was August 28, 2012. Another key date during this time is August the 5th, 2012, supposedly when Tammy Cowens is connecting Suarez with Cuffy about there being a truck up there, you know, which I'm later finding out through later on in the Franks hearing. Cuffy's attorney, Joanne Trog, is suggesting that there never was a truck in St. Louis on August the 5th, 2012. And he's being questioned about August the 5th, 2012, when supposedly these phone calls went down and he was out of town in South Carolina at a family reunion. Keith Cromer, I'm speaking of. Shout out to Keith Cromer. But isn't that interesting? Now, mind you, at this same time, Tammy Cowens is supplying information to the DEA on Cuffy, right? And according to Keith Cromer, he knew nothing about Cuffy until Tammy Cowens told him about Cuffy. Keith Cromer testifies on the stand under oath that he knew nothing about Cuff. That's the way he calls him, Cuff. Until Tammy Cowens told him about Cuff. And even when Tammy Cowens gave him a phone number on Cuff, he put the phone number into the DEA system, the NATIS or whatever you call it, and nothing came up on Cuff. And he put in Fidel Suarez's number, and it popped up in LA. It was under investigation, and that's how he learned of Fidel Suarez. But somehow DEA St. Louis, Cromer contacts DEA St. Louis about Cuff, and they tell him, we're investigating him too. And he lets Tammy Cowens speak to them. Now, this is just pure speculation on my part. All of this is here. Let me read it for you. My boss, because I briefed him on it, because when we, in 2012, I believe, let me start over because that was too messy. My boss was because I briefed him on it. Because when we, in 2012, I believe, we wound up, the special agent in charge who was here in St. Louis became the special agent in charge of the Atlanta office. So I briefed my boss on all these things so he could keep track, not only because of that, but because of all the deconfliction issues we were having. Page 93 of 158. Speculation. What I'm going to say now is my hypothesis, my conjecture, my speculation, and pure guesswork. But it's an educated hypothesis, it's an educated guess, and it's an educated conjecture because I've read a bunch of information. I've read damn near the entire Franks hearing. Perhaps when Tammy Cowens gets on the phone with the DEA from St. Louis after Keith Cromer introduces DEA St. Louis to her, maybe Tammy Cowens begins to tell DEA St. Louis about her relationship with Keith Cromer. And the DEA in St. Louis says to themselves, there's no way we can let Cuffy get arrested in Atlanta, because that's what Keith Cromer wanted to do. That's what he was preparing to do, was to set up Cuffy through CS1, Tammy Cowens, through CS2, and another dude, I think his name was Diego, in Atlanta, and he was going to try to bust Cuffy in Atlanta. But I guess DEA St. Louis says we can't let Cuffy get busted in St. Louis, because if it were to ever come out about this alleged relationship between Tammy Cowan, CS1, and the DEA agent, Group Supervisor Keith Cromer, Cuffy's gonna walk. That's not gonna stick. So we gotta arrest him in St. Louis, which is what eventually happens. And not long after the special agent in charge of the St. Louis office transfers and becomes the St. Louis the special agent in charge of the Atlanta office, within a year, Cuffy is busted in St. Louis. So maybe Tammy Cowens was debriefed by St. Louis DEA and told them everything about her going on these trips with the group supervisor and going to dinner and the movies with the group supervisor and her alleged relationship with the group supervisor. And they felt like they needed to have it happen in their backyard instead of in Atlanta. But that's a real fact. The special agent in charge of the St. Louis office in the middle of the investigation in 2012 transfers from St. Louis to Atlanta and becomes the special agent in charge of the Atlanta office while they are investigating Cuffy. Now, is that like a setup to Cuffy? Is that like entrapment, or is that like a deliberate move to make sure we get cuffed by all costs? Or maybe was other information in files deleted or whatever to make sure they got cuffed? But I thought that was interesting. What else did I want to say about Tammy Cowan? And that's what really happened. Because if DEA Atlanta and Keith Cromer and Tammy Cowens bust Cuffy in Atlanta, and Cuffy takes it to the extent that he took it to, which is what we're seeing, he walks. He walks because he damn near walked with the St. Louis joint. What else did I want to say? Did I say everything? Y'all make sure y'all follow me on Spotify too. The podcast was sold on Spotify. The podcast was sold on Instagram. Yep, that's what happened. But see, that don't sit right with me, because it would seem like, I mean, I know it's a government body and they can move wherever they want to move, but why not move the special agent in charge of the Denver office to Atlanta, or the special agent in charge of the Cincinnati office to Atlanta? Why move the special agent in charge of the St. Louis office to the Atlanta office while we're investigating Cuffy, who is moving back and forth, or maybe is just back in St. Louis at this point, but has lived in Atlanta? It's just, It was like they were trying to make sure. You know what I'm saying? Like they were trying to make sure they got caught. Peace.